Hi, everyone, and welcome to this broadcast. Mark DeJesus here, helping to equip you for your healing and freedom journey. I'm all about mental, emotional, and relationship health. Today, I want to ask you a question. Are you an enemy to yourself? Do you live like you are your own worst enemy? Are you at war within yourself? Are you fighting this deeply entrenched battle that could be titled at this stage, the war of you against you? Today, what I want to do is I want to bring out how the brokenness in our lives, the trauma, the pain, the neglect, just the overall brokenness of our journey can cause us to turn against ourselves and live as though we are our own worst enemy. Now, you have an enemy, but the enemy is not you, but because of patterns in our life, survival mechanisms, we begin to turn on ourselves. We become adversarial to ourselves, and it prevents us from experiencing the healing and freedom that's available for our life and our journey. So today, I want to talk about 8 ways that we become an enemy to ourselves, and I pray this will help bring some illumination to where you are in your journey. And one of the things that is important to understand is, let's look at Isaiah 61, where it brings out the message of the gospel, the prophetic message of the gospel, which as a part of it, and if you've been around my materials, I bring a really strong emphasis on within the gospel is the power to heal the brokenhearted. And that is all of us. Many of us disconnect ourselves from that, but we all have areas in our lives that need healing and restoration. And so that word brokenhearted means the first part of it means to burst or to break into pieces. And so what happens in our life when we are experiencing, when we have a manifestation of brokenheartedness, and I have many videos that talk about that. What is a broken heart? What does it look like? But one of the things that happens is we become broken off and separated. And so within that sense of separation, we can become broken off, so to speak, where we feel disconnected. We become fragmented from God, from other people, but also ourselves. And we often don't realize this. Now, a lot of this is really what we're learning is this stuff is a result of trauma, significant events in our lives that have wounded us, formed us in negative ways. It comes out of neglect. Neglect is a massive producer of brokenheartedness, meaning trauma can be things that happen to you. Neglect is what should have happened but didn't. A lack of emotional equipping is a big part of this. But all these things are just wordings we're using to describe a broken heart. Now, what happens, and let's use trauma or a significant event that was painful. Let's use this for illustrative purposes. And I want to walk you through these 8 things, because the first thing that happens is in the midst of pain is you feel alone. You look around and you don't see help. You don't see help from God. You don't see help from people. You don't see help within yourself. So what happens is a rejection root takes over. And I teach a lot on this rejection mindset because it helps us to understand this sense of disconnect, the sense of separation, because rejection is all about separation, disconnection. It's all about that. Creating and forming and keeping this sense of distance that you feel between you and God. If you feel far from God as a believer, most likely a rejection mindset is in play. You feel separated from others, but then you also feel separated from yourself. So there's this loneliness, isolation. We just feel alone in the pain. In that, shame comes in. And what shame does is it creates this blanket perspective over everything. We see this all the way back in the Garden of Eden, where as soon as they ate of the fruit, the shame of what they've done hits them and survival mechanisms kick in, because shame connects to embarrassment. It connects to a sense of uncleanness. It drives us to hide. We start to self-protect, because what we need is grace, mercy, compassion, nurture. But instead, shame comes in to give us survival mechanisms to keep this disconnect happening, right? That's really the goal of shame and rejection, is to keep disconnect in play so that wholeness, because part of the healing of our broken hearts is reuniting and breaking the walls of separation that make the disconnect continue in our lives. So with the shame blanketing our pain, one thing that happens, and this is a often an understandable next step, is we look for someone to blame. And some of this is understandable. It's like there's a wrong happened, who did it, right? That's understandable. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what happens is the focus of our journey becomes a blame focus. Because if I'm focused on blaming you, I am staring at you. I am looking at you. I mean, how many of us in our journey, we've been deeply wounded and we're still thinking about that person? We're still thinking about, they have space in our head, and we're thinking about what they're doing, or they got away with it, or maybe bitterness has taken over and resentment is in play there. But shame will keep us in a blame game and keep us from a focus. Now, this is my point. My point is that when we're in the shame blame focus, we are actually distracted from experiencing healing ourselves. So what shame does is it's an unloving response to pain because it's looking outward instead of looking at what you've been through with kindness, grace, mercy, and nurture, because that's what we need. So this begins the rumblings of you turning on yourself, because what happens is we get in the blame game, we blame others, right? And again, it's understandable. This person did it. They need to take responsibility, right? But when shame takes over, it becomes a focused in thing, in an unhealthy way. So we're blaming others and our focus is on everybody else and what they're doing. Then it often goes to blaming God. God, where were you? Where were you in all this? We go into language, why'd you let it happen? Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you step in? We create all these accusatory things. We start accusing God and so forth. But really what happens in this cycle, it doesn't end with God. You think it does. I'm just mad at the world and mad at God. No, what happens is you actually are living out of a posture of actually blaming yourself too in this process. So this is the process of you turning on yourself in the midst of this. Instead of looking at yourself with compassion and grace and love and care, you're turning and you're becoming an enemy to yourself. This is beginning to form. Why? Because there's this alone feeling, shame enters in, and you look around and you go, well, there's no one left to blame. Yeah, blame this person, blame that person. But eventually you look at your life and your journey, and now you're hostile against yourself because life is a struggle. You're struggling to overcome. You look at, because you're looking outward. Now you're looking at your life and your journey, and you're being very hostile, very harsh on where you're at and what you're going through. Because remember, what you need is compassion, grace, mercy, and nurture. Instead, that's being shoved out. And you're now in a war within yourself. And when you blame yourself in a shame-filled way, you create a disconnect to yourself. When we blame ourselves in a shame-filled way, it's not about taking responsibility and like, okay, I see it the way it is. It's not sobriety. Shame disconnects us from sobriety. We can't see things as they are so that then we can heal and pay attention to what's needed moving forward. We get stuck on blaming others. We get stuck on blaming God. But in the midst of it all, you're in a cyclone of this energy where you're actually very hostile to yourself. And this leads us to number 4, a form of self-rejection, where we disconnect from ourselves. We have a sense of rejection relationally from God. We have a sense of rejection relationally from other people. And now we're in a sense of disconnect from ourselves. And we go opposite of what we actually need, because in this place of pain, emptiness, neglect, you need to become a kind, compassionate witness to yourself to say yes and amen to the love and grace that God has. Instead, we push back what is offered to us by God, by others, and what is available even in ministering to ourselves. And here's what happens. We disconnect. We numb out. We check out. We abandon ourselves. How many of you have actually abandoned yourself? That in many ways, in your pain, you go, abandon ship. And instead of being compassionately gracious to yourself, you withdraw. And some of this can stem from patterns of dissociation, which dissociation is a way that we disconnect as a survival mechanism. And dissociation is on a spectrum where there's just kind of a checking out, numbing out, and it can go to very, very extreme measures depending on how trauma affects us, depending on the inner survival mechanisms that have been at play, how much fear has been a part of our life. And so when we're in this place of self-rejection, these monsters rise in the midst. One of them is self-hatred. And self-hatred is, when I teach on self-hatred, it's where love is being withdrawn. In other words, love is taken away from the picture when love actually needs to increase. And so many of us, and I've had to confront the monster of self-hatred because it was a very silent but heavy presence in my life. When I say silent, it wasn't yelling and screaming, but it was just this undertone of keeping me. It's this irritable, grumpy presence within my thinking that kept me from saying yes to love and seeing myself through love. Self-condemnation creates a relationship where you constantly accuse and judge yourself. You're quick to judge. Rather than quick to mercy, you're quick to judge. And then this can spill out into others because the self-hatred and self-condemnation we carry is also by which how we relate to the world around us. So this way of relating is a rejecting way of relating and not a loving, gracious, compassionate way of relating. So fear comes into the picture. And fear, what it does is it makes us very avoidant. We avoid intimacy and vulnerability because we feel separated from others, separated from God. We've turned on ourselves now. And within that, there's a message that goes about. And the message says this: the world is not safe. People are not safe. God is not safe. So fear gains the narrative. So now we're apprehensive, we're avoidant. And the more avoidant we are, the more it caves in and caves in and caves in. So we avoid this, we avoid that. Instead of facing our fears and healing and working through, we now have an avoidant response. Intimacy, vulnerability are very scary. So this affects marriage, it affects friendship, it affects how we relate to people in general. It's just like Adam said, I was afraid, so I hid. And what happens is this sense of I don't have safety, and fear takes over and says, you're not safe. You got to hide. You got to withdraw. Now, the problem is, and I'll get to this in a second, you're hiding in yourself, but you've actually turned against yourself. So this is not even a safe move to begin with, but fear takes over the narrative. And the driving message of fear says, I'm not safe. And we never ever want to feel those abandonment feelings ever again. Because going back to the beginning in step number 1, that place of feeling alone, abandonment takes over. And that's why I constantly teach at the core of all our woundedness and all our struggles is abandonment. It is a sense that you will leave me, God will leave me, and I've already left myself because I can't stand myself. I don't see myself in a favorable light, in a healthy way. I don't have a good perspective in how I see myself. And on top of it, that feeling of abandonment, and we don't always consciously are aware of this. It's kind of like a background driving emotional force. I never want to feel that abandonment ever again. So the problem is we don't get to experience what we want. We want relational connection, but we're playing this dodgeball game where we want it, but we avoid it. We want it, but we avoid it. So then a lot of times we want God to come down and just rescue us. God come down out of heaven and rescue us. Or we look to people and we have demands on them. The problem is that when love is actually arriving to us, we avoid it. And in the process, number 6, we hide in ourselves, but we become adversarial to ourselves. So we're actually backing up into a trap because we feel disconnected from God, disconnected from people, and we're hiding in ourselves, or maybe I'm just safe within me. The problem is you've become your own worst enemy now. You're adversarial to yourself. So this heavy darkness clouds over. And now depression sinks in, and now this despair comes in because you're locked into yourself and you're yelling at yourself. And many Christians super spiritualize this, No, I must decrease, he must increase, and I'm just dying to self. And no, dying to self is not self-hatred. And this false humility that we portray and these spirals that we go down that are a response to anti-love, anti-grace counterfeits. And so what we come into agreement with, and many don't even realize this, and I bring this up when I talk about heart healing and healing from trauma and drama, we become a house divided. How many of you are a house divided within yourself? I'm not talking about right now you and your church, you and your family, you and your marriage. I'm talking about you and you. A house divided against itself cannot stand. So we become divided in ourselves, so we can't even take steps forward because we're constantly criticizing ourselves, putting ourselves down. Then we're double-minded. We know a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways because there's hope available for us, but we're constantly, yeah, but. So we don't take steps. And even if we take a step and it doesn't work out, we beat ourselves up and then we go back into our cave and go, forget it. I'm not taking that step again because we've not been kind. And kindness tells us, hey, you took a step. Celebrate it. Celebrate that step. But we don't even know how because we've lost our sense of encouragement. Our faith feels like it's run down. Our hope is diminishing. And when we look in the mirror, we're disgusted by what we see. So how many of you are in this trap of being a house divided against self? And so number 7 is we become trapped by an inner critic. So the inner critic takes the airwaves. And so whether you look at your past, your present, your future, it's critical, judgmental, downright hateful. And I've said this to many people. If I was to jump into your mind and hear the thoughts that are given the microphone in your thinking, I would have to call Child Family Protective Services because there is constant abuse going on. You against you. Those with obsessive compulsive disorder, I'm talking to you. Those you're having, even those who have depression struggles, mood struggles. There's this hostility that comes against you. Those who are struggling with addictions, there's a war within yourself, and you look outside yourself for something to make you feel better or to escape the pain, when in reality, we actually need to turn to ourselves with love. And we don't know how to do that because we've never been taught and equipped in love. So this inner critic traps us. We become used to it. It's toxic. It's negative. It's gross. But healthy thinking feels very foreign. So this inner critic, what it does is it resists love when it's given to you. And you find ways to disqualify other people, nitpick other people. And what we'll fall into is we will reject others before we are rejected. How many of us do that? We write off people before they can ever have a chance to have an impact in our life. Or we ever put our guard down. We just write people off, reject before we're rejected. Self-protective mechanism. Again, we're isolating ourselves into a prison. And so out of the war against self, here's where we typically go. The first thing out of being at war, there's a lot of combustion in this. Self-hatred creates a lot of fiery anger. It's not necessarily anger that's lashed out, although it can happen. It's a combustion within. You're just under this stress, under this. So what happens is you become a performer. That's one direction you go in. And performers and perfectionists and do it. Make sure you do it right. And you cannot comprehend relationship apart from doing. You don't know how to relate to God and just be loved as you are. You don't know how to receive love from people because you've always been a doer. And that's the only way you can feel any sense of belonging is it's transactional. You're transactional with God. I do this, you're okay with me. I do this for this person, they're okay with me. We don't know unconditional love, which welcomes us right now into relationship. We don't know that. Or out of self-rejection, we don't bother at all. We don't take a step. We don't do it. Now, many of you will say, I toggle between both. I perform. I crash and I go, what's the point? And then there's those who are like, I don't even bother trying because they're in a self-rejecting place all the time. We lose confidence. We lose the ability to step out. Now, if you're seeing these areas in your life, in your journey, I want to recommend right now you go into my book, God Loves Me and I Love Myself, because this is my journey. This is a very, very deep part of my process of no longer living as an enemy to myself. And the second resource I would recommend out of that is the Heart Healing Journey, because this will help you to take a step of how to experience awakening, healing, and transformation in your life, in your journey, from the inside out, from the work of God in your heart. Because the journey of healing is going to involve renewing how you see yourself, because it's going to take you having new conversations with yourself, interrupting the inner critic and saying, today there's going to be a new way I am going to relate to myself, because this is anti-love. This is anti-grace. So today, this can be a new day for you to experience healing and freedom in your life, in your journey. If this was a blessing, would you please like, subscribe, and share it with those that you love? Go to markdejesus.com, subscribe to the email newsletter where I give updates on what's happening in resource development in my life and what I'm working on in further resources. You can go to markdejesus.com, click the donate button to support these videos. It's greatly appreciated. And it's an honor to be a brother from another mother. And Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, I'll be back with some more episodes, some more broadcasts for your healing and freedom journey. In the meantime, I'm out.